Well, is Bibi's administration finally coming to an end? I would not count on it yet. I have to say, I, like many other people, have made the mistake of, declaring an end to Bibi's, current administration in the past. I have only done it once or twice, I think, or maybe it was only once that I did. But, after I got burned that time, I don't want to make that mistake again. So I'm going to hold off on declaring him dead until, the coroner actually shows up and verifies he doesn't have a pulse. Because Bibi's come back from a lot of tough spots. It looked like back in 2019, I believe it was, that he was done. And, it's actually, I think on BitChute, it's still one of my most popular videos. And in the title and the thumbnail, I declared very boldly that, hey, this is the end of Bibi. And it had, a photoshopped picture of him making a very scrunched up, angry face. Or like sad face. It was a terrible picture of Bibi, but I loved using it. I might use it again for this video if I can find it again. Actually, before I get into that, for those of you who don't know, because I guess in most parts of the world this probably isn't the top of the news, Bibi is on the ropes right now. In fact, he's almost dead. Not physically, but politically. There has been a new coalition formed in the Knesset of a scant 61-seat majority, who seeks to create a new administration, a new government, as they call it in a parliamentary system, to replace Bibi Netanyahu's current government. Now, Netanyahu has been the Prime Minister of Israel for most of my life. There was only a few years there in the early 2000s when he was not the head of Israel. So it'll be, if he's truly gone this time, it'll be a whole new world for me as far as following Israeli politics, which I don't do too closely. I only do to the extent that, it affects us here in America, which is, Israeli politics really does affect us here in America, so I should probably follow it more closely than I do. But, Netanyahu's been the guy for so long, and you kind of know what you're getting with him. He's a known quantity. But every other party that's not in his coalition, they pretty much, define themselves kind of on as being against him because, he's been there for so long that, there's a lot of people who want him gone. People who are tired of him because it's been a really, really long time. And so this coalition that has formed really has nothing in common with each other ideologically. In fact, it's a very, very diverse coalition, even by, I think, parliamentary standards. This is the kind of thing we could never see here in the United States because, it's not like, okay, Bibi's on the right? So that means that if there's a new government forming, well, then it must be, some sort of government that is to the left of Bibi. Theoretically. That's just the way the political swings work in countries. Is, you have, okay, this is, a right-wing government. Okay, now we're going to come in and we're going to have a more center left-wing government. Well, in this case, the parties are, all over the ideological spectrum. That you have a centrist party, you have left-wing parties, and you have right-wing parties, or at least party, as a part of this coalition, including an Arab party, which I had thought that there had never been an Arab party in an Israeli governing coalition, but according to the Times of Israel article I was reading earlier, apparently it has happened, but it's been decades. They didn't specifically cite which government had an Arab party in the coalition, but at the very least, this is a pretty historic event, and it just shows you how much these other Israeli parties want Bibi gone. It's been so long. They're like, fine, we'll bring in the Arabs because we need their few extra votes. I guess it's like 4 votes that this Arab party has, in the Knesset. Which, when even including those guys, they can only scrape together a 61-seat majority, and that's if there are no defectors in any of those parties. So the new Israeli prime minister, if this deal goes through, people were thinking it would be Yair Lapid, who is the leader of, I guess, what's considered a centrist party. They're essentially liberal Zionists. I guess like people like the ADL. That's kind of what I think of when I think of liberal Zionism. But apparently, Yair Lapid is not going to be the prime minister. I guess they're going to. He will be in a couple of years. This is sort of a 4-year deal, and they're for the first 2 years, it will be a different guy who's actually, apparently, it's this guy named Bennett. I can't remember his first name. I think it might have been something hard to pronounce. But anyway, somebody named Bennett is going to be the first prime minister. I believe currently, or at least formerly, he was the education minister, and he is a man of the right. Apparently, some people consider him to be the right of to the right of Netanyahu, or at least he was to the right of Netanyahu at some point. But he is from another, what is considered to be a right-wing party in Israel. So it's kind of interesting that you're seeing what was always considered, Bibi was considered to be, he's the right wing of Israel, after all these years, they still can't get a left-wing or even a centrist prime minister to replace Bibi. They have to bring in another right-winger, which just shows you how weak the Israeli left is, which is quite interesting. I mean, the left-wing parties, I think, only get about 5.5% of the vote. The rest of it is all flavors of the right and the center, and I guess a bit of the Arabs in there. And so the Arab Party. The Times of Israel described them as Islamist. I don't know if that's the case. It's a lot of the stuff is very hard because I only speak English. I don't speak Hebrew or Arabic, so I'm only able to read English media on this. I can't go to a lot of the sources because a lot of these guys, if they're on Twitter and stuff, these different guys are going to be tweeting in Hebrew or Arabic. So I mean, it's not so easy to know what the truth is on this stuff, but I'll at least say that the Times of Israel, which is a pretty typical Zionist publication, they are an Israeli newspaper. I used to listen to a weekend radio show that was hosted by a former editor of the Times of Israel. I believe his name was Tom Rose. It was the show Bauer and Rose, and judging by the way that Rose talks, I can kind of think that, I can kind of understand the slant that the Times of Israel probably has. And so if they're calling this party Islamists, I don't necessarily know that is the case. So, try not to get mad at me for using that phrase if you feel it's inaccurate. And so I guess it's also quite interesting that you would have an Arab party join a coalition, which, is going to put forward a prime minister who is at the very least as tough on the Palestinians and on the land issue as Netanyahu is, if not more so. And again, I've seen conflicting stuff on that. Like, I guess the general theme is that Bennett has somewhat moderated a little bit in the past few years. Like, it used to be it was definitely to the right of Netanyahu. Now I guess it seems a little more uncertain. Politics changes. But definitely not a guy who's like, hey, we should stop bulldozing Palestinian homes. This is not that guy. So it's interesting that an Arab party would even be willing to join a coalition with this guy, because he could theoretically be worse than Netanyahu. So we've got 6 days for this until the vote in the Knesset on this, and apparently there's one swing vote who is coming out and saying, who's part of this, one of the parties that it makes up this 61-seat coalition. One of these guys is saying, I might not vote for the coalition, or for this new government, which it would mean they would only have 60 votes, which would be one short of majority. It would just be 50-50 split at that point, which would be kind of significant. It would put the Israelis right back to square one, because of course Netanyahu still wouldn't have a majority in support of him, but I'm pretty sure he would remain the prime minister until somebody else could form a majority. He's kind of a dead man walking as it is right now, but if nobody else can form a majority to overthrow him, he's going to be sitting pretty for a while. So I think all Netanyahu has to do is woo this one guy away so that they lose their 61st vote and are stuck with only 60 votes. And I certainly would not say that this is an impossible task for somebody like Netanyahu, especially since, if you consider that these coalition talks started before this last war with Gaza, and it kind of looked at the time like, hey, it's kind of strange that these tensions are flaring up right as these other parties are trying to get together to overthrow Netanyahu. It's almost like maybe this is a little too convenient for old Bibi. Maybe he just decided to try and provoke these folks at the Al-Aqsa Mosque in the last week of Ramadan to try and, agitate the Palestinians and get them to do something, which might stop this coalition with an Arab, from being able to reach out to an Arab party and get them in there, because it might make the Arabs too politically toxic. That's certainly what it looked like. I'm surprised that they were able to bring an Arab party into the coalition after all this, to this recent spat. But I guess it just shows that's how strong the desire is amongst these folks to get Bibi out of there. But for now, I won't hold my breath. I will wait the 6 days and see how the vote goes. I would not be shocked if it fails and they are unable to form their coalition. So with that said, I think that's just about all we know at this point. I probably won't do another update on this until the coalition vote, and I will try and cover it one way or another. I mean, I'll definitely have to cover it if Bibi's out of there. But if it fails, it might not come across my radar, but I will try and keep an eye out for this and remember, next week that, I need to check and make sure how that vote went, and see if Bibi's there or not. And if it ends up falling apart, I definitely want to discuss why that was. Because after the Israeli elections of 2019, in which I thought Bibi, was going to get kicked out of there, I kind of dropped the ball on paying attention to that, because I took it as a sure thing. He's not the largest party anymore. He lost. He lost. There's going to be a new coalition that forms, and then I didn't pay attention and know how that all came apart. So I feel like I'm playing catch up now. But in the meantime, there's plenty of other stuff to talk about. I mean, there's things I didn't get to today, but I wanted to make sure that I said something about this, because this was, the biggest story of yesterday, aside from the Fauci emails. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.